This is a Minder Christmas tale, and it comes from TV Times, Boxing Day, 1988. And it's called Saint Nick, Alas. Said Arthur Daly, the thing about Christmas, it's a time for giving. Or in your case, receiving, Terry said, dismally watching the windscreen wipers push the lightly falling snow aside as they headed for Arthur's lockup. Arthur changed gear, deliberately ignoring this, wanted to keep Terry sweet, trying to ease into the proposition without making it sound like a nice little earner. A time for goodwill to all men, especially kids, he offered, glancing at Terry, searching for agreement. A way in. Terry cast him a suspicious look, sensing a move. Arthur smiled with a face that he hoped radiated sincerity and continued. Nothing quite like watching their beaming faces as they open up all the prezzies Santa's bought them, right? Terry responded with a wary, I guess so. You don't sound too sure, said Arthur. What are you telling me? You don't like kids? You got something about not making children happy? Terry sighed. All the signs were there. Arthur slipping whatever it was in sideways. Never direct, which didn't stop him answering. I like kids to be happy, okay? Fatal. He knew by the way Arthur smiled. It was confirmed when Arthur said, I knew you were the right man for the job. The car skidded slightly to a halt in the settling snow outside the lockup. Terry didn't want to ask what job. In fact, he was thoroughly dispirited by the thought he had allowed Arthur to corner him yet again. Detective Constable Jones, sitting at a desk in the squad room, also felt dispirited. Here it was, Christmas Eve, and here he was, on duty. A mood guaranteed not to be enhanced by the fact that his superior officer, Sergeant Rycott, was also on duty at the sparsely manned station. He tried to cheer himself up by thinking of the Three Valleys and the Welsh Orpheus choir singing We'll Keep a Welcome in the Hillside. He gave up. It made him homesick. But homesickness degenerated into a moment of despair when Rycott, pretending to be busy at his desk, said, Don't just sit there daydreaming, Jones. Do something. D.C. Jones realised in that moment that his father had given him bad advice when he told him not to follow his footsteps down the mines. I'm doing something, Gov, he said. Really? I'm amazed. I'm agog, in a voice that exuded sarcasm. Blinking vacantly into space constitutes serious activity, does it? D.C. Jones glanced at the pathetic Christmas trimmings some desperate optimist had seen fit to drape around the room, and thought maybe it was time to consider a change of career. Funeral director, something like that. Terry didn't like the idea, but Arthur kept laying the guilt trip on him about how he would be letting the kids down. Toddlers is what Terry was calling them by now. He also felt a right Wally standing there in the lockup dressed in the Father Christmas costume. It didn't help that the beard had a grey tinge and it smelt distinctly unsavoury. I'm supposed to be meeting Arnie and a few of the chaps down the Winchester for a drink-up. He tried again as Arthur thrust what appeared to be a school bell in his hand, his voice overlapping. Cop this! Give it some stick and a few ho-ho-hos. Merry Christmas, children. Terry rang the bell, heard himself saying ho-ho-ho, Merry Christmas, children, and experiencing a sense of unreality. Forget the bell, he said, handing it back to Arthur, whose face dropped while his brain told him not to push it when Terry had that look in his eyes. You're right, Arthur said, setting the bell aside. You're going to need both hands anyway. Then he quickly realised now was not the time to go into that particular detail and added, for the sack of prezzies, like it was all one sentence. Sack? The snow was falling more heavily now. It was dark, and visibility was poor as they headed in the car towards Mr. Jackson's house. Mr. Jackson was the man with the kids. A dear friend of mine, Arthur had said. If he's such a dear friend, how come I've never heard of him? Terry asked. Arthur muttered something about keeping his social life separate from his business life. Terry didn't believe a word of it. So how much is my whack for doing this job? He inquired. Payment, please, Terry, do not insult me and demean yourself. This is an act of goodwill. Suffer little children to come on to me, and all that. Do you think the geezers who slipped across the desert humping gold, frankincense, and myrrh to Bethlehem were looking to be on an earner? And before Terry could protest, Arthur slammed on the brakes, skidding and smashing into the curb. Whiplash caused the Santa hat to drop over Terry's eyes. Arthur, oh my godding it, stumbled from the car to examine the damage. What the hell happened? Asked Terry. A cat had run out onto the road. Was it a black one? Asked Terry, trying to remember if it meant good or bad luck. Can't be good, groaned Arthur, pointing at the near side front wheel sticking out from the wing at an unnatural angle. So what do we do now? Terry asked. We'll have to walk it. It's only round the corner. Get the sack of prezzies from the boot. Around the corner turned out to be about half a mile away. And so there they were, eventually outside Mr. Jackson's huge Gothic house, snow-capped and looking like Christopher Lee's castle in Transylvania against the black sky. Terry's feet were wet and icy cold in the synthetic boots with the white nylon fur trim. So what was he supposed to do? Just knock on the door or what? He asked for Arthur, snuggled up in his Crombie overcoat and handmade brogues. Nothing so mundane, my son, said Arthur, heading up the driveway. Do you think Prancer, Dancer, Vixen and Rudolph tug Santa from the North Pole across the rooftops of the world just to knock on doors? No, it has to be done proper. In keeping with tradition, you nip down the chimney. What? Don't worry, Mr. Jackson's had it done. It's swept especially. As if that made a difference. The kids will be gathered and waiting at the bottom. Think how surprised and delighted they'll be when you show up in the Ingle Nookie. Forget it. No way am I climbing inside a chimney. Are you crazy? If being sentimental and filled with the Yuletide spirit is crazy, then I cop a plea, Terence, Arthur said in tones that suggested great sacrifice and even greater humility. Arthur, I'm 12 stone, Terry protested. I couldn't get down the chimney even if I wanted to, which I most definitely don't. Not a problem, my son, smiled Arthur with breathtaking confidence, giving Terry a reassuring pat and guiding him towards the back of the house. This gaff was built in the days when they shoveled kids up the flue to give them a dusting. Right, that's not grown men in Santa suits humping sacks of toys, though. Sack, Terence, singular. What difference? I ain't doing it. So Arthur explained how he and Mr. Jackson had discussed the practicalities, how Mr. Jackson even had a builder check out the measurements and remove the chimney pots to make room for access. Of course, it might be a little confined, but nothing someone of Terry's suppleness and physical prowess couldn't overcome. The two of them were at the rear of the house now, with Arthur pointing at the ladder reaching up to the roof, saying, See, you don't even have to climb a drain pipe. Anticipation and preparation is the hallmark of my continuing success, as you should well know, Terence. Oh, really? I thought it was telling porkies and conning people, was the best defence Terry could muster against Arthur's onslaught of perverse logic. Uncalled for, Terry, not to add unchristian, said Arthur, pointing a digit heavenward. Shall we try and have some respect for his birthday? Then, glancing at his watch, he indicated the ladder again and handed Terry a torch. Up you go, then. We're running late as it is. D.C. Jones still felt confused about his future. He thought about therapy as a solution to his disenchantment with the job, and then decided against it on the grounds it would undermine his career prospects. A promotion board, if they found out, would view it as some sort of mental instability, a condition of the mind that immediately brought Sergeant Rycott to the forefront of his thoughts. Now there was a real nutter. Why else would the scourge of his professional life decide it would be a good idea for them to leave the relative warmth and comfort of the squad room and patrol the manor in search of criminal activity? Real villains took a break at Christmas to be with their families and spend their ill-gotten gains. Suddenly Rycott was shouting, Pull over, pull over! Jones did, as Rycott twisted in his seat to peer and point dramatically through the rear window. Do you see it? All D.C. Jones could see was a badly parked Jaguar. See what, Gov? Arthur bloody Daly is what, Rycott said. Fortunately, the immediate area around the base of the chimney stack was flat, and Terry was able to stand with relative safety, carefully wedging the sack of presents between his numbed feet, while he flashed the pencil torch down into the blackness of the flue. It appeared clear of soot. There was even a series of small iron lugs sticking out at regular intervals where he could get a toehold. That at least was reassuring. The actual width of the flue wasn't. Maybe he could just about squeeze down it. He could hold the torch in his mouth and sort of balance the sack on his head. It gets wider as you descend, Arthur had assured him, but then he would. It's Daly's car, all right, Rycott said, and those are his footprints. I'd recognise them anywhere. The sergeant's obsessive preoccupation with the activities of Arthur were legendary on the manor. But to claim he could recognise the man's footprints in the snow? Jones was incredulous. They were stood by Arthur's damaged car, observing the two sets of footprints leading off into the distance. Remarkable observation, Gov, DC Jones said dryly. And it's my guess there's someone with him. McCann, Rycott exclaimed, then realising, is that supposed to be some form of Celtic wit, Jones? It took them about 5 minutes in the police car to follow the footprints to the entrances of Mr. Jackson's residence. And a feeling of euphoria swept over Rycott as he peered around the corner of the house and saw Arthur standing near the foot of the ladder, staring up at the roof. Got the slippery sod at last, banged to rights. Capturing Arthur Daly for burglary, and in all likelihood his colleague in crime Terry McCann, was the best Christmas present he could ever wish for. And he leaped from the shadows, calling, "Get the cuffs on him, Jones!" Startled out of his wits, Arthur tripped and fell over. Mr. Jackson was somewhat bemused. He had opened the door to reveal Arthur handcuffed to one police officer while the other one said, "Do you know this man, sir?" Having first got his wife to usher the children upstairs so they wouldn't be upset, Mr. Jackson led the trio into the living room, where he proceeded to confirm he knew Arthur and had hired his services to supply one Santa Claus. Rycott's disappointment and frustration was immeasurable. DC Jones could have sworn he saw tears forming in his superior's eyes as he released Arthur from the handcuffs, and squirming as Arthur demanded an apology for the unwarranted assault on his person. It was during this exchange that a brick fell into the inglenook fireplace, and the muffled, distressed voice of Terry was heard calling for help. It took the firemen 3 hours to release him. Long before this, Arthur had felt it prudent to use Mr. Jackson's phone to call for a taxi. Terry could be very unreasonable about this sort of thing, sitting at home now, smuggled into his favourite armchair, sipping a glass of port, puffing on a cigar and warming his feet at the open fireplace, while our indoors prepared for dinner. He mused about the evening's events. Mr. Jackson had been very understanding, apologetic even. He insisted on paying Arthur the 100 sobs fee that he had agreed upon a week earlier. Naturally, Arthur had accepted it, feeling it was only fair considering the ordeal he'd been through. And as an afterthought, Terry too. Perhaps he should bung the boy, say, 20 quid, tell him it was out of his own pocket. After all, it was Christmas.